The world, or at least the world as we know it, called Terratus, is being taken over by an overlord named Kairos. Kairos' army is nearing total domination, with the only region not controlled by the overlord being called the Tiers, basically the Florida of Terratus. Kairos' army consists of Archons, which are individuals who possess some sort of natural power, usually magical. They then control smaller subsections of the greater army of the Overlord. Two of these Archons are competing head-to-head to lay claim to the Tiers: General Graven Ash, leader of the Disfavored, and the Voices of Narat, leader of the Scarlet Chorus. They're taking a really long time capturing the Tiers as they bicker back and forth, inadvertently delaying Kairos' occupation of the Tiers. Kairos isn't known for patience, so he sends an edict. An edict is basically a scroll that contains a really powerful spell, or curse if you want to call it that. Once read aloud, it will be cast into place. This particular edict basically says, capture the capital of the Tiers within a week, or everyone down there will perish. Toodles! Love Kairos. So, who better to deliver this edict than the player character, known as a Fate Binder, which is a fancy way of saying pupil of Tunon, the Archon of Justice. That is where Tyranny begins. Tyranny does a lot of really interesting and unique things. You'll notice this right away with the character creator. Character creation isn't terribly in-depth. The underlying RPG mechanics are good, but we'll talk about those later. What's really interesting is the conquest part of character creation. Conquest is your ongoing career with the armies of Kairos. It walks you through various battles and scenarios that the Tiers have been through already, and you're given some choice as to what happens and how it happens. You'll get some character bonuses for completing various feats within the conquest, but it's not just about your character. The choices you make within the conquest make a genuine impact on the world and how its inhabitants react to your presence. Player choice is a common theme within Tyranny, and there's a lot of different outcomes that can happen depending on what you say and do. So, arriving on the scene, edict in hand, Tyranny introduces its combat mechanics. It's real-time with pause. The only other game I've spent any time with that runs on real-time with pause is Knights of the Old Republic, which, needless to say, is quite different to Tyranny. So I basically had to learn an entirely new system here in my playtime. I usually prefer turn-based, and at first I really wasn't enjoying the combat. It grew on me eventually though. I started learning the systems, what does what, and getting a hang for the progression, and I pretty quickly started having a lot of fun with the combat. That being said, the difficulty doesn't stick around for that long. Shortly into the second act, the challenge completely evaporated. Once you get your hands on some of the spell components, you become really powerful. Magic in Tyranny is absolutely the best part of the game. The story is a close second, but this magic is incredible. It looks more complicated than it really is. You pick a core element, say fire, you pick an expression, which is basically the type of magic that you want. So take a fire core with a distant impact expression, and now you have a fireball. Then you have accents, which are little attachments that you can put on to give smaller bonuses. Faster cooldown, more damage, bouncing, a bleed effect. There's a lot of different combinations and effects, and each one you put on adds to its lore requirement. Lore is basically the universal spellcasting stat, with other more specific skills for certain element types as well. Like I said, this is by far the most fun part of Tyranny, but it also comes with a pretty hefty downfall. That being, why do anything else? Why make a sword and shield knight? Why make a stealthy assassin? Magic is not only the most fun to play around with, but it's also probably the best. You can debuff, you can heal, not to mention the amount of damage you can toss out with magic. It starts out somewhat slow, but even after just a short while, magic quickly becomes the Swiss Army knife to any scenario, making lore the most important stat in the game by a long shot. That's not to say you can't do other builds. They work, and even just a little bit of lore will enhance your character with some powerful magic effects. It's tough. Do you consider it a negative to the game because magic is so much stronger, or do you consider it a positive towards the game since magic is so fun and unique? It's a bit of both, and if the game didn't have as many branching paths, I don't think it would be as big of a deal, but if you enjoy the story, you'll want to play through the game a few times to see what all you can get up to. It's a small annoyance, magic being as pivotal as it is, but it's still an annoyance. Magic also plays a huge part in the story and your connection to these giant towers. Nobody knows who built them or why they're here, but as you progress through the game, you'll unlock more, and they serve as this sort of base of operations for your party. You can train skills, you can craft items, you can research stuff, and you can completely ignore all of it. Tyranny is not a very long game. It's of satisfying quantity, and the game's forking paths and narrative depth lengthens its runtime through repeat playthroughs. That being said, I forgot these towers existed for about 90% of my playtime. Only in the third and final act did I stop to play with the towers a bit. There's actually quite a bit to these, and you can sink quite a bit of time creating and upgrading gear, training skills, and managing workers. It's not the most complicated management, mind you, but it's enough to break up the pace of combat and dialogue if it interests you. The spires do play a huge part in the story, which, if you made it through the first paragraph of this video, you'll know is quite in-depth. To preface these next statements, I've never found an interest in fictional politics. The inner workings and lore of armies and councils in film and TV, it's just not my thing. Tyranny is pretty much all fictional politics. It makes up a huge portion of what goes on and the choices you're presented with. That is to say that I really had to force myself to engage with the story at first. The first hour or so is a ton of reading, which I'm pretty used to with these kind of games, but there was a lot of names to remember, and who was above who, and who had jurisdiction here, and what laws say this or that, and is this okay or isn't? It is a lot. But it isn't as complicated as it first seems. There's only about 4 characters that you need to remember. Ash and Narat, they control the armies you'll be fighting with or against. Tunon, who you report to, and Kairos, who is easy to remember and is also completely shrouded in mystery to absolutely everyone. The higher-ups mostly refer to Kairos as she, but others will say he, and most of the population also refers to him as he. Is he human? How old is he? Where did he come from? Who knows? And the mystery of Kairos is partly cause for the seam at which you're given the opportunity to pick at and push the narrative in the direction that you see fit. A lot of mystery and intrigue boils over the course of the game, and unfortunately not all is concluded by the end of the game. No, the story here, while it has a grand scope, sets its sights on the tiers specifically, and that is where the line is drawn. By the end of the game, the tier's fate is decided by you and only you, which leaves the larger question of what happens to Kairos. There's some ending slides showing the aftermath of your decisions and what your companions get up to after the events of the game. As far as any satisfying conclusion to the massive scale that the world has, it just isn't there. It doesn't end on a cliffhanger, which could have easily been done. It's satisfying in its own way, and of course there are multiple endings. The game speaks of grander things, but doesn't get the time to explore them. There's some smaller nitpicks, like skill checks being really easy to pass. In my first playthrough, I never saw a skill check that I couldn't pass, outside of specific character backgrounds or allegiance requirements. But none of that took away from the strong points that Tyranny has. A great magic system, an incredible world and story, and choices and consequences at every turn. It's a really good game that has issues like any other, but has a really unique style. The entire game oozes this gray area vibe where nothing you ever do feels fully good or evil. You're forced to make difficult decisions constantly. The fate of the tiers and ultimately Kairos' reign is up to you. Regardless of if you snuff out those who oppose Kairos or fight for freedom, you'll have to make choices that are difficult to discern from right and wrong. I thoroughly enjoyed Tyranny, and I'll be returning to see what other things I can learn about the world and characters that are here. It's a good time, and shouldn't be missed by any RPG fan. It lacks in certain areas and thrives in others, but overall the game left me feeling like my time was well spent, and I enjoyed my experience far more than I thought I would. I hope there is a Tyranny 2, which continues the story of Kairos, as despite being what is effectively an invisible threat, he or she or whatever Kairos is an interesting villain. I doubt we'll see a Tyranny 2, so Kairos may just be shrouded in mystery forever, which might make him even more terrifying. If you stuck around to the end of the video, thank you. It really does help out. If you've played Tyranny or have any other RPG suggestions, let me know. Until next time.